TAM TUK by George Adams. Continued. Chapter 11. I woke up when they brought in the breakfast. It was a mottled orange, 2 slices of white bread with the smell of polythene still on them, a pat of soft, foul-smelling margarine, and a cup of villainous lai cha. I pecked at the bread, gagged on the tea, but ate most of the orange to keep my strength up. I lit a cigarette, which tasted the way cheap Chinese cigarettes often do. A mixture of dandruff, belly button fluff, sawdust, and shredded smelly sock. There must have been some nicotine in it somewhere, or perhaps it was just the carbon monoxide, but I jerked awake and almost felt elated for a second before I realized that I was alone in the hole and at the mercy of people like Commander Littlejohn. I wondered if I'd said too much or too little, and decided I'd said too much. For a moment I had a vision of the hideous figure of Mrs. Chow in the witness box, relating how she had seen me staring at Mr. Song's body with a needle in my hand. I laid out another game of paper chess. My opponent was doing unexpectedly well against overwhelming odds when the door opened and all my belongings were laid on the table beside me. I was then told I was being released in an hour's time. I reached for my pipe and decided to run it through with cleaners before filling it with the few remaining fragments of Erinmore in the tin, just to show how patient I could be under fire. It tasted like ambrosia on a stick. Funny how we need so little sometimes to remind ourselves we're still human. Outside prison, people seem to need an awful lot, but perhaps they're less intent on proving their humanity than proving they can be plain nasty if they try. I was escorted to the lobby of Police Central, where a familiar face was beaming at me with a mixture of embarrassment and genuine amusement. It was Jack, or Jake Halloran, of course, veteran of 1,000 carousers at the Devil's Advocate, stalwart of the Press Club, and then after hours the den under the ICAC, if he could remember how to get there, and the taxi driver could cut through the alcoholic slurs and the Glaswegian burr. He really did look ready for retirement now, his 6-foot-something frame drooping as much as his large unhidden stomach, which lurched forward over his belt between the edges of his open silver-grey jacket like a sack of potatoes on a delivery man's shoulder. "Nigel, you old soak, up to your usual mischief?" "Nothing usual about this one, Jack. I'm beginning to check on my insurance policy." He looked serious for a moment, and the thick creases of his crimson face rose up in a crested tsunami of age and concern. "Care to take the complimentary breakfast? As long as it's not here." We found the hotel on the corner. It had decent coffee and croissant, which tasted as if they still had some life in them. I caught a view of us both in the mirror. We looked like a couple of seedy travelling salesmen discussing the night before. "You wouldn't be wearing any kind of wire, would you, Jack? I only asked for form's sake, you understand." "Difficult to hide anything on me these days." "That's true enough. So what do you want to know?" "Well, just tell me what's been happening. I'll take it from there." I took a sip of coffee and a deep breath and started. A few days ago, when I thought I was running a nice sleazy private investigation bureau and felt like I wasn't likely to be bumped off and found in a gutter some dark night, I was hired by a prominent local politician to find the whereabouts of her daughter, who had suddenly gone missing, or rather had decided to skip town or lie low because she was embarrassed by something. She just happened to be the girlfriend of our Mr. Sung Jr., and working in the association run by Mr. Sung Senior. She turns up for a talk and a shake of her hips one afternoon in Chungham Kok. Lo and behold, but soon after Mr. Sung Senior is found dead, she disappears again, and this time there's a ransom demand for her safe return, not for very much as kidnappings go, addressed to Mr. Sung Jr., who decides to hire me and to hold his hand, although he hates my guts. Off he dutifully goes to TUK at midnight to hand over the readies and save the gal, but it all goes horribly wrong and he's beaten about the head and tossed over the reservoir wall for no apparent reason. Getting it so far? I'm trying to. The girl in question carries a Kel-Tec automatic in her handbag and likes to wave it around when the mood takes her, but no one knows if it's loaded or not. On a hunch, but probably because I can think better in low-life hotel rooms, I put myself up the El Dorado, where I'm followed by a retired expat ICAC man with a gin bottle in his suitcase who likes to play Boy Scout and has a thing about the politician who hired me in the first place and a theory about it all which he won't tell me, probably because he hasn't even worked it out for himself yet. His room is bugged, not very well, but mine is not. He thinks it's all great fun, and so do I, within reason, until Commander Littlejohn flapfoots in one afternoon with a small posse and starts asking me his usual array of dumb questions he thought up after reading an old Dick Tracy story someone had lent him on the Lantau ferry all those years ago. So what's your theory? It all depends how much guts you have. I think it's pretty big and an ICAC job. If it all gets around Police HQ and becomes general police knowledge, you're finished. And even at the ICAC, it's hard to know if they have the bottle for this kind of thing nowadays. I thought at first it was just a bit of routine corruption that went wrong, you know, tenders for the vendors at Stanley Waterfront, district councillors, upcoming elections. But I think it goes deeper than that, much deeper. I think even you will be misled by the surface appearance of events. There's little rhyme or reason to bumping off Mr. Sung Senior if all he only knows about was involved in was a bit of the Stanley Waterfront corruption. There was no point killing Mr. Sung Jr. if all they wanted to do was to keep him quiet until the elections were over. He was doing a pretty good job of keeping quiet on his own. And the disappearance of Adeline Chow, well, I think that's where the key to it all lies. I don't think she's disappeared at all, but I'd be grateful if you could let me know if she did cross the border legally at any time the last week or so, just in case. And also find out, if you can, as a matter of urgency, who uses carbolic acid these days. Rather unusual way of robbing someone out, isn't it? Hard to say. It's pretty difficult to detect normally, not a substance people usually check for. And in the heart muscle, that's even harder. Most of the police pathologists would have missed it. The symptoms look completely like a heart attack. Exactly. But why did they want Sung dead? He was just the normal run-of-the-mill, greedy old Hong Kong duffer. Harmless, really, unless you're seriously behind with the rent. And even then, he never sent the boys round. So you think we should pass it over the ICAC and have them call Mrs. Chow in for a grilling? Hardly likely to happen with the elections on, and her being so close to the mainlanders. That would need an order from the chief executive. He doesn't have the balls to issue it. I don't think Chow will tell you much anyway. I think it's above her head, out of her control. She's only in the shop window of something. But the political wing, if you like, she just takes orders. So where shall we, or the ICAC, start looking? If we get permission to look, that is. It's the Anti-Triad Bureau who has to start things off, isn't it? Perhaps it's a turf war or a regrouping or a manoeuvre we know nothing about. I don't know anything much about the triads these days. I would be interested in the company Adeline kept. She's been seen with a few film producers and directors, so that would be a start. We all know they like to be seen with pretty girls. Perhaps there's more to it than that. Who knows? You think she's a triad mole? No, I don't think she's a mole. But that's the big connection you have to look at, and I don't know what the connection is. Otherwise, you could just look for robbery and corruption motives, or alibis rather, on the Sungs, which won't lead you anywhere. And after a few months, you can close the book and pretend nothing happened. Isn't that the usual way? It's rather mean of you, Nigel, laddie. However true it might be, in the old days, I would just go to MacArthur Brown and have a word, and we would proceed, or we wouldn't proceed. The things are different now. The few remaining white guys are definitely on the margins, and it's all politics, not police work. Believe me, I haven't got the clout. Well, just put up and shut up then, and definitely, most importantly of all, tell little John to leave me in peace. The newspapers were lying around, as they did in the hotels. One of the English dailies was now a free handout, and this move had brought their readership into the thousands at last. There's a short item about Alex Sung, who was said to have been distressed by his personal circumstances and the recent death of his father. Nothing about being pushed over a wall at midnight by men in a black van. Things are changing, aren't they? I said, and pushed the paper over to Halloran. Or perhaps they're staying the same, and I'm just realizing it. There was nothing anyone could say to that, so I left Jake at his table and thought about getting into the office early, but there was no one around to impress, and I had had enough of Wan Chai for a long time. I made my way down Hennessy Road to the MTR, dodging the stream of short men in dark clothes and sensible haircuts and shoes too big for them, and I caught sight occasionally of girls in boots and short skirts who were beginning to show and entertain even this early. But there were never enough of them to beat back the feeling that I was a washed-up has-been with all the world against him in a dingy job and no money in my pocket. If that was a Monday morning feeling, I seemed to have it all week. Yamate was emerging from its brief torpor, which must occur even there, perhaps between 5 and 6 in the morning, when all the hookers had gone to sleep, all the mahjong parlours and nightclubs and snooker halls had thrown out their last customers, given things a wipe round and pulled the iron grill across the door. The detritus of it all blew about and caught your ankles. Thin, translucent plastic bags from the convenience stores, crushed cigarette packets, cartons of lemon tea with the straw still in the pack, and tissues billowing like small sails, and which had been used for who knows what. The doorman at the El Dorado was snoozing in his chair, and a firebomb wouldn't have woken him. At the desk, there was a mainland girl in a crumpled uniform trying to get a computer to work. The bucket women were hard at it, spreading the dirt and dust around with slow-motion vigour and a kind of morose acceptance of things as they are and always would be. The Via Dolorosa was silent as a tomb. I could actually hear my feet sticking to the carpet. I was wondering if Jake's was an early riser, and whether that much gin every day would allow you to ever get up early and face the day. Perhaps it did if you took enough of it. Drinkers had always impressed me with their ability to bounce back from their self-induced oblivion. Perhaps Harry was up already, listening to the World Service on a battered Roberts radio, doing the crossword or the Sudoku puzzle, or whatever retired lonely old expats do in the morning to fill the long hours before the Hong Kong club's curry tiffin is served. I knocked at the door. Silence. I knocked again, so hard this time that the door actually opened a little.